August 19th, 1944. Wehrmacht Headquarters, East Prussia. Colonel General Alfred Jodl studied the stream of reports from the failing Western Front. His staff had run the numbers on Allied supply, tracing a thin thread of fuel and ammunition from the Norman beaches to the tip of Patton's Third Army. The line stretched over 400 miles. Their conclusion sounded certain. The Americans had outrun their fuel and spares. Patton would be forced to stop within days, perhaps within hours. No army could keep steel moving without gasoline. From his desk at Hitler's Wolfschanze, Jodl applied lessons every senior German officer knew. An armored division on the move devoured around 150,000 gallons of fuel each day. The American spearheads were 400 miles from their depots. The arithmetic pointed one way. Third Army would stall, giving the Wehrmacht a chance to reform along the Seine, and, if luck held, to freeze the front before winter. He did not know that a short distance to the west, nearly 6,000 trucks were already thundering east in an unbroken queue, headlamps on in defiance of blackout rules, delivering 12,500 tons of cargo every 24 hours. The Red Ball Express, a logistics scheme so bold that German doctrine had never imagined it, was about to overturn core beliefs about mechanized war. Within 72 hours, the tanks that were supposed to be stranded would smash through positions on the Seine. Within a week, Paris would be free. Within a month, the Americans would reach Germany's border. The best-trained minds in the Wehrmacht were about to receive a tutorial in American supply that would reshape their view of modern conflict. The lesson would be delivered by 23,000 truckers, 3/4 of them African-American, who turned a system of one-way roads into the most efficient military pipeline yet seen. German confidence in an American logistical failure rested on long practice and recent observation. Germany had pioneered blitzkrieg, refined combined arms, and understood the tyranny of distance more intimately than anyone. Their own drives had sputtered when fuel and spares failed to keep pace with forward units. In Russia, the early collapse did not come from Red Army pressure so much as the inability to push food, ammunition, and gasoline across an ocean of bad road. German trucks shook themselves apart on Russian tracks. Horse teams, still the backbone of the army's transport, could not match the speed of panzers. Different rail gauges stranded supplies far to the rear. General of Panzer Troops Heinrich von Luttwitz, who would command X-Lal 7. Panzer Corps that autumn had written in July that the Americans faced the same hard wall the Germans had hit in the east. Mechanical superiority turns to handicap once it must feed itself. Machines demand fuel, ammunition, and parts. The Americans had raced 400 miles in 30 days. History foretold the next stage, paralysis. German intelligence kept precise ledgers of American consumption. A Sherman tank could manage roughly half a mile per gallon on road and much less across country. An infantry division required about 700 tons per day. An armored division drew 1,000. Patton controlled 12 divisions attacking on a broad front. The math felt ironclad. 12,000 tons each day, hauled 400 miles over broken roads and through a network the Germans had sabotaged during withdrawal. Major General Siegfried Westphal, soon to be Rundstedt's chief of staff, wrote on August 20th that even with an unlimited truck park and perfect roads, which the Americans did not have, and without breakdowns, which never happened, the advance could not last beyond 48 hours. Physical laws, he concluded, do not bend for American factories. At 2 in the afternoon, on August 25th, in a seized chateau near Les Sables, Lieutenant Colonel Loren Ayers of Motor Transport faced a room of doubters. The charts were stark. Third Army was burning through supply faster than any force on record, racing at a tempo for which no plan existed. The conventional methods had collapsed. Railheads lagged. Timetabled convoys and fixed depots could not keep up. "Gentlemen," Ayres said, "we will build a one-way road from Cherbourg and the beaches to the front. Every truck will run 20 hours out of 24. No stops except fuel or true emergencies. Minimum throughput, 12,500 tons per day." The name came from rail slang. A Red Ball freight was an express that trumped all other traffic. Their highway system would work the same way. Absolute priority. No delays. No exceptions. Technical details mocked German teaching. 2 parallel one-way routes, one eastbound for loaded vehicles, and one westbound for empties. Continuous operations with headlights on. No stopping except for fuel or failure. Convoys at 5-minute intervals, holding an average 35 miles per hour. Mobile repair every 50 miles. Military police pulling off any vehicle that dropped below 25. Colonel Charles O. Thrasher, heading the advance section of the communications zone, read the requirements. 140 truck companies. At least 5,958 vehicles, 90% ready for service. On paper, this was impossible. 36 hours later, it was running. On August 26th, drivers of the 3916th Quartermaster Truck Company climbed into GMC CCKW 2.5-tonners, the Deuce and a Half, stacked with 105mm shells for Patton's guns at Melun, 300 miles to the east. The makeup of the Red Ball Express would have shocked Nazi race theorists. Of the eventual 23,000 drivers, roughly 75% were African American soldiers serving in a segregated army. Men who could not use white facilities across much of the United States kept the army of celebrated white generals in motion. They built a culture almost immediately. Slogans blossomed on hoods and doors. Patton's Blood Bank. Hitler, Here We Come. Detroit to Berlin Express. They forged their own road rules. Slow trucks yielded at once. Breakdowns were shoved into the ditch. Any vehicle that sagged below 20 miles per hour counted as a roadblock. By August 28th, German scouts began to report a sight with no precedent. Recon elements of 116th Panzer Division radioed from hills above the main route. A continuous column with visible headlamps stretched for 20 kilometers. Spacing was tight. There was no blackout. The estimate reached 1,000 vehicles per hour. The Americans had abandoned the usual precautions. This ran against everything in German manuals. Headlights after dark invited air attack. Tight columns begged for artillery. Lack of spacing risked a single breakdown freezing the line. Yet the Americans carried on. Lieutenant General Edgar Feutinger, commanding 21st Panzer, watched the highway on August 30th from cover. His report to Army Group B captured the growing alarm. The enemy runs a supply mechanism beyond our understanding. Vehicles pass at intervals of half a minute, day and night, without pause. The missing insight was simple. American logistics played a different game. Where German doctrine stressed concealment, the Americans relied on volume. Where Germans husbanded vehicles, the Americans assumed heavy attrition and planned to outlast it. Where Germans insisted on strict procedure, the Americans improvised. The figures shattered prior estimates. In its first week, August 25th through 31, the highway delivered nearly 90,000 tons, a daily average above 12,800. The round trip ran about 686 miles. With 5,958 trucks turning roughly 1.5 trips a day, the convoy even burned 300,000 gallons of fuel to feed itself. German analysts who captured these numbers dismissed them as fantasy. They were genuine, and they were climbing. By September 5th, the Red Ball Express ran with a rhythm that logisticians who still relied on horses could scarcely imagine. Columns departed the western terminus every 5 minutes. An average convoy held about 67 vehicles. Standard load per truck was 5 tons and 7 when drivers dared an overload. The run of 350 miles one way took 14 hours on average. Turnaround at either end was 2 hours. About 5,000 vehicles were in motion at any moment. The operation generated fixes by the hour. Around 1,800 trucks a day suffered some failure. Mobile teams performed triage on the shoulder. 15 minutes to mend or push it clear. Mechanics cannibalized dead vehicles, swapped engines with cranes in 45 minutes, and sent the healthy back to the line. When the main route jammed, drivers scouted alternates. French buses moved people so trucks could carry cargo. Captured German lorries were repainted olive drab and folded in. Bypasses were cut around shattered bridges, and temporary roads bulldozed through fields to keep columns flowing. Engineers threw up bypasses around shattered bridges, using rubble as fill and timber trestles for spans. German observers saw improvisation produce order and could not account for it. Their doctrine prized schedules and forms. The American road prized momentum. Fuel management stunned them most of all. The highway burned 300,000 gallons a day for its own movement, more than many German units received for all purposes. Yet shortages did not appear. Another miracle unfolded. Pipelines under the English Channel began pumping fuel in September, an engineering feat German intelligence had failed to detect. Depots appeared every 25 miles. Tanker columns shadowed the convoys, so refueling rarely took more than 10 minutes. To German staff, this looked like waste. It erased friction. Tempo stayed high. Major General Walter Warlimont examined aerial photos and saw fuel dumps the size of towns. He wrote that the Americans seemed to possess gasoline depots larger than Germany's entire strategic reserves. They burned more fuel transporting fuel than German armies received to fight with. This was no longer war, as Germany understood it. It was industrial overflow made mobile. The Red Ball Express did more than sustain Patton's tempo. It multiplied it. German tactical doctrine held that an armored division could advance 20 to 30 miles per day under perfect conditions. Patton's formations, supplied by the highway, averaged 40 to 60 for weeks. On September 1st, 1944, the 4th Armored Division covered 35 miles before noon, paused to refuel and rearm from waiting trucks, then pressed another 32 miles before nightfall. A single day's movement of 67 miles shattered every German planning table that assumed a daily ceiling of 30. Colonel General Heinz Guderian, reviewing the reports from East Prussia, at first refused to believe them. No armored force could sustain 60-mile days for a week. Mechanical wear alone forbade it. He called the reports propaganda, until intercepted American radio traffic confirmed them. Worse, the Americans were transmitting openly, unencrypted, so confident in their pace that they no longer cared if the enemy listened. By September 5th, 1944, German intelligence had collated comprehensive data on the Red Ball Express. The implications were ruinous. Every assumption about Allied limits had to be rewritten. The analysts listed impossibilities that had somehow become facts. The Americans threw away vehicles rather than repair them. Drivers operated for days on stimulants, violating every regulation of human endurance. They ignored camouflage, drove under lights, and suffered daily mechanical failure rates that would cripple any other army. Yet the system kept accelerating. Field Marshal Walter Model, reading the report, grasped the larger truth. If accurate, he said, "We face not a superior army, but a superior civilization. They waste because they can afford to. They fear nothing because resources have made them invulnerable." The price among the drivers was invisible to German eyes. Men stayed behind the wheel for 72 hours at a stretch, hallucinating from exhaustion and benzodrine. More than 300 died during the operation. Accidents were constant collisions in fog, overturns on cratered roads, engines igniting from heat. Still, morale remained astonishing. Most of the men knew that history would remember them only dimly, yet they understood that they were proving something immense, that Hitler's racial theories were nonsense, and that skill and courage did not depend on color. Captured officers later testified to the Red Ball's effect. Colonel Hans von Luck told interrogators, "We realized we had lost when we grasped your supply system. You broke every rule, squandered fuel, discarded machines, and yet triumphed through sheer volume. You had turned industry itself into a weapon." German soldiers at the front endured the psychological consequences. At night they heard the endless engines, an unbroken murmur of power that seemed to flow from the sea. They had 3 cartridges per rifle, while the Americans brought millions. The sound alone became a form of warfare. The trucks themselves bewildered German engineers. The GMC CCKW, backbone of the operation, embodied mass production perfection. More than 500,000 had been built by war's end more trucks than Germany possessed of all kinds combined. The design incorporated features that German models still treated as luxuries: full-time all-wheel drive, waterproofing for 30-inch fording, engines tolerant of low-grade fuel, heaters that worked, standardized parts. American maintenance philosophy was equally alien. Where Germans rebuilt, Americans replaced. Where Germans rationed spares, Americans scrapped the vehicle. Where Germans trained elite mechanics, the Americans fielded tens of thousands competent enough to fix 80% of failures in minutes. As the front advanced, the Red Bull stretched east with it, improvising new routes faster than German staff could map them. When Chartres became inadequate, fresh corridors appeared overnight. The White Bull Express linked Rouen to Paris. The Green Diamond carried freight from Cherbourg to railheads. The Red Lion connected Bayeux to Brussels, and later Antwerp. Each appeared within 48 hours of conception. German planners needed weeks for equivalent changes. Americans painted new signs, posted MPs, and started the engines. The racial dimension unsettled Nazi theorists most. Their ideology declared black troops incapable of technical skill or initiative. Yet these same soldiers were performing the miracles that kept Patton moving. They knew the irony and drew strength from it. Every mile denied Hitler's lies. Some captured Germans forced to load Red Bull trucks later wrote of the shock. African-American sergeants who calculated weights quicker than engineers, who spoke English with command and courtesy, who treated prisoners decently. Propaganda collapsed under first-hand evidence. To sustain the river of trucks, engineers erected a web of support that Germans deemed inconceivable under combat conditions. 40 bridges repaired or built anew. 15 large fuel depots, 26 maintenance bases, 8 temporary towns for the men. When German sappers destroyed the bridge at Mantes, believing it would cut the supply line for 6 weeks, American engineers threw up a replacement in 14 hours. Convoys lost only a brief detour. Observers were stunned. No prolonged planning, no blueprints, only action. The Americans built faster than destruction could catch them. One accomplishment struck artillery officers hardest: ammunition flow. American gunners fired without rationing, something no German unit had done since 1942. During the reduction of Metz in September 1944, the 20th Corps Artillery expended 100,000 shells in 24 hours. The Red Ball delivered every round, plus reserve stock. German batteries at Metz were limited to 50 rounds per gun per day. The difference was annihilating. American barrages continued for hours, while German officers calculated that such fire should require 50 truckloads each hour, and still the trucks came. Attrition rates that would paralyze any other army became routine. By late September, the average truck lifespan had fallen from 30,000 to 10,000 miles. 30% of vehicles were out of action daily. Engines were swapped 500 times per week. 10,000 tires wore out weekly. Over 5,000 trucks were destroyed or abandoned. Yet the flow never faltered because production back home had foreseen such losses. New convoys of ships arrived weekly, offloading replacements as fast as the old ones died. German analysts realized that the Americans were destroying more vehicles each week than the Wehrmacht possessed in all of France, and their capacity still rose. They had achieved logistics faster than consumption. French civilians along the route witnessed abundance that erased years of occupation austerity. Drivers, especially African Americans, often shared rations despite regulations: chocolate, cigarettes, soap. Children waited beside the road each day. German intelligence reported the propaganda effect with alarm. The French now saw Allied victory as certain, citing the convoys as proof. Resistance activity quadrupled in those regions. A populace once resigned to occupation turned openly hostile to Germany. By early September, the Red Bull faced its greatest strain. Patton had outrun even this miracle. The round trip now stretched over 700 miles. Men collapsed at the wheel. Machines shook apart. German observers noted widening gaps between convoys and slower speeds. General Hasso von Manteuffel reported on September 8th that American supply lines showed collapse signs, intervals growing, tempo falling. This was their moment to strike. But within 72 hours, the Americans restructured everything. Transfer depots were inserted mid-route to have individual hauls. Driver rotation and forward maintenance bases appeared. Vehicle numbers doubled. By September 12th, throughput had risen again. The crisis that should have broken the system instead strengthened it. To supplement the road, the Americans opened a new front in logistics the Germans had labeled impossible: mass air supply. C-47 transports began hauling critical loads straight to forward fields, 3 tons apiece. On September 16th, Wehrmacht spotters counted 900 flights in a single day, 2,700 tons by air. The Luftwaffe, at its height, had managed 300 tons a day to Stalingrad, and called it a maximum effort. The Americans treated aircraft like more trucks, accepting losses and compensating with volume. Industrial arithmetic, not tactics, dictated victory. The Red Ball Express also overturned traditional command structures. In the Wehrmacht, authority flowed rigidly downward. Generals planned, colonels executed, sergeants obeyed. In the American system, a sergeant could redirect a convoy, reroute trucks, or commandeer fuel without waiting for orders. Lieutenants acted with the autonomy of battalion commanders. Germans watching this apparent chaos could not fathom how it produced efficiency, but the flexibility, the permission to decide and adapt, was what kept the system alive. It was logistics by initiative rather than logistics by discipline. By October 1944, as railheads advanced, the Red Ball's necessity began to diminish. What was meant to be a 10-day emergency operation had lasted 82 days, hauling more than 412,000 tons of supplies across 122 million ton miles. German commanders, now defending their homeland, wrote their final assessments. Field Marshal Model summarized the reality in his last report. We were not defeated by American tanks or planes. We were defeated by American trucks. The transition to rail transport became another feat of speed. American engineers rebuilt 1,000 miles of French track while the highway convoys still roared beside them, laying new rails faster than German demolition teams could sabotage them. They even repurposed captured German rolling stock. When the final figures were compiled, 412, 193 tons moved in 82 days, nearly 6,000 trucks operating daily, 7,000 at peak, 23,000 drivers, 700,000 gallons of fuel consumed each day. The numbers defied belief. 40,000 tons of ammunition had gone to Patton alone. 15 million rations, 135,000 tons of medical supplies, all carried at 35 miles per hour. German officers in captivity later admitted that they had multiplied their own best performance by 3 to estimate what America could do, and had still been wrong by a factor of 10. Beyond the statistics lay something deeper. The Red Ball Express shattered their faith in military superiority. They had mocked American soldiers as soft, dependent on machines. Then they watched those same men perform miracles of movement that no general staff calculation could explain. Prisoners of war would stand silent behind wire, counting the trucks on distant roads. Some wept. They understood. America could waste more material than Germany could manufacture. That was the end of their world. The operation also forced an unexpected reckoning within the U.S. Army itself. The segregated structure of 1944 had relied overwhelmingly on African American drivers for its success. Eisenhower's visit to the Red Ball in September made the contradiction impossible to ignore. His aide, Captain Harry Butcher, recorded, "The general watched colored drivers who'd been at it 20 hours straight. He said, 'These men are winning the war as surely as any infantry. We'll have to reconsider many things.' That moment, and others like it, began the slow turn toward desegregation, achieved 3 years later. The Red Ball's black soldiers had proven on French roads what they had always known, that given equal tools, they would equal any man. German racial theorists, confronted with this, simply fell silent. SS journals that had once derided Negro troops stopped mentioning American logistics entirely. The evidence was too obvious, too destructive to ideology. Post-war, German engineers and generals dissected Red Ball records in detail. The lessons reshaped global military thought. They concluded that logistics, not tactics, determined strategy. Redundancy eliminated vulnerability. Mass overcame inefficiency. Decentralized action produced speed. Standardization multiplied power. General Franz Halder wrote in 1950, "The Americans understood that logistics governs operations, Not the other way around. We learned too late. Among the 23,000 drivers, stories of courage multiplied. Corporal John L. Houston drove 48 hours without rest to deliver shells to the 2nd Armored Division, falling asleep at the wheel and being revived repeatedly by fellow drivers. Private Booker T. Washington kept a burning truck full of medical supplies rolling for 2 miles before leaping free moments before explosion. His cargo saved dozens of wounded men. Thousands of such acts illustrated an American culture of improvisation, mission first, regulations second, that Germans could neither copy nor control. Late in 1944, German commanders tried to imitate the miracle. Operation Grief during the Ardennes offensive planned to use captured Allied trucks painted with German markings to create a fast supply column. The effort collapsed within days. German drivers could not maintain American speeds. Their mechanics lacked spare parts, and their fuel stocks were too small. Otto Skorzeny, leading the operation, reported, "We captured 50 American trucks. Within a week, 30 were unserviceable. The Americans would have replaced them. We tried to repair them. That difference explains our defeat." Then came winter. Ice, snow, and freezing rain turned Europe's roads to glass. German doctrine claimed that below -10 degrees Celsius, wheeled logistics ceased. Yet the Red Bull kept moving. Chains on tires, alcohol in radiators, engines running through the night, slower but unbroken. The convoys crawled through blizzards that had halted panzer divisions. American trucks, crude and plentiful, proved immune to weather itself. By May 1945, captured German supply officers were required to study the Red Ball as a case lesson. Their conclusions were humbling. General Friedrich Schultz wrote, "The Americans created a temporary civilization. Thousands of men, thousands of vehicles, millions of tons of material that existed solely to feed armies and vanished when done. We built permanence. They built superiority from impermanence." Guderian, the father of Blitzkrieg, agreed. "We invented rapid warfare, but never solved its weakness, supply. The Americans solved it through industrial excess. The Red Ball Express was not a supply line, but a river that drowned us." The cost $100 million in 1944 stunned German economists. But to the United States it was trivial. Each day of war cost $250 million. By shortening the conflict an estimated 6 months, the Red Ball paid for itself many times over. Lieutenant General John C. H. Lee, commander of European logistics, summarized bluntly, "We wore out 5,000 trucks and 23,000 men to destroy the German army in France. In any previous war, that would be catastrophe. In an industrial war, it is simply overhead." Its influence did not end in Europe. Thousands of veterans returned home with unmatched experience in transport and coordination. They built the modern trucking industry, founded companies like Yellow Freight and Roadway, and helped design the interstate highway system. They had learned that speed outweighs perfection, that momentum itself is efficiency, and that a nation able to keep its wheels turning can move the world. Historians would later agree that without the Red Ball Express, Patton's advance would have stopped, Paris would have fallen weeks later, and the Germans might have built winter defenses. The operation validated an American doctrine that valued logistics over maneuver. While German generals quoted Clausewitz, Americans studied the Detroit assembly line. The Red Ball proved which philosophy belonged to the future. On September 15, 1944, Field Marshal Gerd von Rundstedt received complete intelligence on the operation. After studying it, he told his aides, "We face something beyond military solution. The Americans have made distance meaningless. The culminating point we counted on does not exist. They have changed war itself." When a staff officer proposed striking the convoys with the last Luftwaffe squadrons, von Rundstedt shook his head. "They have 6,000 trucks. Destroy 1,000, they replace them in a week. We would need 200 aircraft a day. We have not 200 total." Behind the statistics were human stories. Drivers awake 3 days refusing rest because the front can't wait. Mechanics working knee-deep in frozen mud. Teenagers who had lied about their age to join. Their relentlessness bred legends among German troops. The Americans were not soft. They were relentless machines powered by will and caffeine. And because they fought from choice rather than fear, they were unstoppable. The Red Bull became an unplanned weapon of psychological war. Even when convoys were absent, American loudspeaker units broadcast recordings of engine noise toward enemy lines. German sentries reported hearing ghost convoys that broke morale as surely as bombardments. Knowing that the enemy's supply was endless made courage impossible. In November 1944, with the railways repaired, the Red Bull Express was officially dissolved. What had begun as improvisation ended as revolution. Its philosophy continuous flow, waste accepted as the price of speed, became the foundation of modern military logistics. And as swiftly as it had appeared, the Great Highway Army vanished within 72 hours. Men reassigned, vehicles redistributed, roads turned back to French control. Germans needed months to dismantle smaller efforts. Americans needed days. When Germany finally capitulated in May 1945, many generals cited the Red Ball Express by name as proof of their defeat. General Hasso von Manteuffel admitted, "When we understood your capacity to resupply, we knew the war was lost. You could feed armies faster than we could destroy them." Field Marshal Kesselring, asked what surprised him most about the Americans, replied simply, "Not your tanks, not your planes, your trucks." The numbers told the final story. 412,193 tons carried, 122 million ton-miles logged, nearly 6,000 vehicles running daily, 23,000 drivers, 57 million gallons of fuel consumed, 180,000 tires worn out, over 5,000 trucks destroyed, 47 German divisions undone by supply superiority, a war shortened by 6 months. Warfare had changed forever. In 1994, at the 50th anniversary of D-Day, the U.S. Postal Service issued a stamp honoring the Red Ball Express. Veterans gathered at the National Postal Museum, many of them African American, proud at last to see recognition. They spoke of sleepless nights, broken axles, and rain-slick roads, but above all of pride. They had driven victory into being, 35 miles an hour at a time. The Red Ball Express proved that in the age of machines, logistics is not supported as the battle itself. It showed that democracy could harness industry faster than tyranny could command it, that abundance could defeat precision, and that sometimes the loudest weapon in war is the sound of 6,000 engines rolling east. The last word belonged to an unnamed German officer captured beside a French road in 1944. Watching the convoys rumble past, he told his guard in weary English, "We prepared for your tanks, your planes, your ships. We never prepared for your trucks." The answer to his question, how to fight an enemy with more trucks than soldiers, was rolling by at 5-minute intervals, headlights blazing, rewriting the art of war one delivery at a time.